In the business world, it's dog eat dog, and you need every bit of competitive edge you can possibly get. Whether you're a salesperson, an entrepreneur, a small business owner, or corporate executive, you've landed on the podcast that gives you that edge and more. This is the Business Coach Unplugged Podcast. Exploring the strategies, tactics, and mindset shifts needed to elevate your business and leadership skills to new heights. Your host has walked the walk. He's coached thousands of clients to remarkable results and rubbed shoulders with legends like Tony Robbins, Ken Blanchard, Jack Canfield, and Brian Tracy. It's practical advice, inspiring stories, and the occasional dose of tough love, helping you to overcome challenges and seize opportunities. This is the Business Coach Unplugged Podcast. And now your host, owner of Potential in Motion, coaching you to the edge of what's possible, Tom Kelly.
Welcome to the Business Coach Unplugged Podcast. I'm your host, Tom Kelly. Today I'm going to cover a topic that comes up frequently in my coaching sessions, and that's accountability. One of my clients asked me just the other day, how do I hold my team accountable? As we dug into the question, my client started venting his frustrations around the fact that his team was getting distracted, missing deadlines, producing poor quality results, and in general just not performing at a high level. At the same time, no one was taking responsibility and owning the fact that things were just not getting done. Many of the entrepreneurs that I coach often express their frustrations around the lack of accountability and ask me, how do I find people to work for me that care about my business and customers as much as I do? This is a question that comes up frequently. If you're a business owner, corporate manager, or an entrepreneur that is frustrated by the lack of productivity from your team and the overall lack of accountability or results, then today's episode is for you. I'm going to cover the top 5 things that you need to do to build a culture of accountability so that you no longer have to worry about things not getting done. I'll talk about the keys to building a high-performing team and how to create a winning environment that creates a high level of trust within the team so that your team holds themselves accountable for results and raises their standards over time. Once this happens, you'll be able to trust that your team has your back and will create the results that you are looking for consistently. If that's what you're looking for, you're in the right place. So let's jump in and talk about how to create a culture of accountability. The first key to creating a culture of accountability is to realize that it's a mindset that comes from the top, so you have to lead by example. The reality is that as a leader of your team, you're responsible for all the results of your team, no matter who's at fault. The minute you start to point the finger or blame others is the minute you begin to erode your ability to create accountability. When you make a mistake, you need to be transparent, own it, and like a true leader, take responsibility for the lack of results. When you do this, the team will follow your lead. It's the first step to creating a culture of accountability. A great example of what not to do is the Chicago Bears. If you know me, you know that I'm a lifelong Bears fan. At the start of the 2024 season, every Bears fan was super excited as we finally had a great quarterback, and some were projecting that we'd even make the playoffs. The problem was, though, as the season went on, the coach, Matt Eberflus, lost the team. They started the season off 4-2 and then lost a huge game against Washington in the last moments of the game on a botched defensive play on the Hail Mary pass, which ended up in a Washington touchdown and a loss for the Bears. That's when Coach Eberflus failed to take responsibility and started making excuses and blaming others for the loss. This continued each week, which led to the offensive coordinator and 2 other coaches being fired, and a 10-game losing streak, which ultimately led to him being fired as well during the season. Then things started leaking out from the locker room around how the lack of accountability had started early in training camp. It got so bad during the course of the season that they actually created a culture of losing and finished the season 5-12. This is a perfect example of what happens when the leader of a team fails to be accountable. When you do that, you erode the trust of your team, and that typically leads to poor results and eventually the destruction of your team. The key thing to remember is that, good or bad, the team is going to follow your lead. If you realize that the only thing you truly have is your word, and you always do what you say you're going to do, you'll build accountability. It will start with you and then spread from there. When you lead by example, then you will be able to delegate and empower your team, and they will start to take ownership of the results they create. This is the first step and probably the most important step to building a culture of accountability. The second key to creating a culture of accountability is to make sure that you and your team have clarity around goals, standards, and metrics. I always say that clarity is power, and if you want to create accountability, the foundation for that is clarity around what the expectations are and how you will measure the results. Keep in mind here that leadership is something that you do with people, not to them. So sit down with each member of your team and set clear goals and metrics together. You can use SMART goals, which I define a little bit differently than most people do. A SMART goal is specific and trackable. This is the written part of the goal. Then you need to determine if the goal is motivational, that's the M, to the person responsible for achieving that outcome. If not, you need to reframe the goal so that it is. It's also important that you both agree that the goal is A, attainable, and finally, it's relevant to the overall goals for the team, which is the R. Additionally, you need to understand what's in it for them as well as how it relates to their purpose. This is an important distinction that most leaders skip. If you ultimately want people to care about your business and customers as much as you do, then it's imperative that their goals are in alignment with what's important to them as well. Get clarity around what the standards are and what great results look like. Then clarify and verify with them that you're on the same page. This will help to create and foster open communication and ensure that your team understands what they need to deliver on. The third key to creating a culture of accountability is to make sure that you set your team up for success. You need to provide them with the tools, training, support, and structure to ensure they can be successful. Great leaders know how to coach and develop people, and if you want to hold them accountable to creating great results, you need to give them the tools and training needed to produce those results. The best way to do this is work with their team to identify what their current capabilities are and what the gaps might be. Then work with them to build a development plan to bridge those gaps. Empowering them to work on their own development will help them grow and produce better results over time. It's also a key step to them stepping up and taking ownership of their results and personal accountability. The fourth step to building a culture of accountability is to not step over anything. This is super important, as how you do the little things is how you do everything. When you allow the little things to slide and step over them, you're sending the message that those things aren't important. And when the little things aren't important, the big things won't be either. A great example of this is something that happened to me early on in my career. I was working for a company as a product manager at the time. We had a team of around 10 people, and a manager wanted to make sure that we had early morning and late day phone coverage. So we asked for 2 volunteers, one to take the morning shift and one to take the late shift. I volunteered to do the morning shift, which meant that I needed to be at work by 7 a.m. in case someone called in. The next day I showed up at around 6:55 a.m. I keyed into my office, then went down to the cafeteria to get a bite to eat and brought it back to my desk. I sat down in my office chair and went to turn on my computer, and I heard a knock on my door. I turned around and it was my boss. "What time did we agree you'd be here?" he said. I confidently said 7 a.m., sir, knowing that I arrived at 6:55. He said to me, "What time is it now?" I looked at the clock on the wall and it read 7:10. 7:10, sir. Then he said to me, just to be crystal clear, 7 a.m. means that you've eaten your breakfast, your computer's on, and your butt is in the chair ready to answer the phone. Are we clear? Man, I was pissed. Here I had volunteered to be the early person. I was doing him and the rest of the team a favor. I thought to myself, how dare he call me out like that? The next day, however, I made sure that I arrived on time. That set the standard for how I did everything else going forward. I didn't like being called out, but in the end, I respected my boss for doing it. The key here is to not step over anything. The quicker you deal with things and set the standard, the easier it's going to be to build the culture that you want. So provide constructive feedback when you need to. Additionally, recognize and reward not only success and great results, but also accountability. When someone screws up but stands up and takes accountability for their actions, then reward them for it. This will reinforce the culture that you're trying to build. Finally, the last step to creating a culture of accountability is to ask the right questions. One of the key shifts here is to start asking what and how questions versus why questions. When you ask a why question, it begs for an excuse. For example, had my boss asked me why I was late, I would have gotten defensive and said that I wasn't late as I had pulled into the parking lot at 6:55. If instead you ask a what question like he did, what time did we agree that you'd be here, it starts a more productive conversation. Usually what and how questions spur on a conversation that leads to a solution, versus asking a why question that ends up leading to a defensive excuse or reason. Another great question to ask when results aren't where they need to be is this a systems issue or a people issue? Most of the time, people assume that breakdowns in a business are due to people issues. In my experience as a business coach, 95% of the time, breakdowns in a business are usually a systems issue, and 5% of the time, it's a people issue. This is a really important distinction, as when it's a systems issue, then your team will work with you to figure out what the problem is with the system. If you say it's a people issue, then your team will start pointing fingers to avoid blame. Having said that, if you do determine that it's truly a people issue, and that person is not holding themselves accountable, then offer them the option to get some coaching from you or someone else to correct the problem. If after that they still aren't getting the results, then that may be the time to take a different course of action. So just to recap, here are the 5 keys to building a culture of accountability. Key number 1, Accountability is a mindset that comes from the top, so you have to lead by example. Keep in mind that you're ultimately responsible for the results your team creates, no matter who is at fault. Your team is constantly watching you, and they'll follow your lead. Key number 2 is you have to have clarity around goals, standards, and metrics. This is a key foundation for accountability. If people don't have clarity around what they need to deliver, there's no way that you can have accountability. Remember, clarity is power, and leadership is something you do with people, not to them. Key number 3, you have to set up your team for success. You need to provide the tools, training, support, and structure for the success if you want to hold them accountable. Key number 4, don't step over anything. Remember, how your team does the little things is how they'll do everything. So make sure that you're giving constant feedback and rewarding great performance. And finally, key number 5, ask the right questions. Make sure you ask what and how questions versus why questions. And also focus on the fact that 95% of the issues in a business are systems issues. So work with your team to address the problem with the system versus pointing fingers and laying the blame on the people. When you do these 5 things well, you'll encourage teamwork and collaboration, and the team will start holding themselves accountable. You'll build trust, which will allow you to delegate more and encourage ownership, which will ultimately lead to winning. When you win consistently, the team will continue to raise their standards and hold themselves accountable to bigger and better results. So that wraps up today's podcast on how to create a culture of accountability. If you follow these simple key distinctions and shifts, you'll build a winning team and culture and won't have to worry about accountability anymore. If you found today's episode useful, you can also access a number of free resources that will help you improve your business as well as your leadership on my website at www.businesscoachchicago.com. Also, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn, as I would love to connect with you. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the podcast, please click the subscribe button, leave a review, and of course, invite your friends to listen in as well. I'm Tom Kelly, and until next time, enjoy your week.
You've been listening to the Business Coach Unplugged Podcast. On this highly useful podcast for people in the business world, you get the absolute top-notch info from an absolute pro on how to elevate your business and your leadership skills. Tom Kelly owns Potential in Motion, coaching you to the edge of what's possible. He's also a professional speaker and leadership trainer. He's worked with some of the biggest names in the coaching business: Tony Robbins, Ken Blanchard, Jack Canfield, Brian Tracy. To sign up for a complimentary coaching session and to access some great free resources, hit the website at businesscoachchicago.com. Your success is not just a possibility, it's a certainty. See you next time on the Business Coach Unplugged Podcast.